welcome to our first full episode of No Comp, No Cap, the real life of a real estate agent. The things that doesn't necessarily make the news in terms of top headlines and those that do make the news. We want to dive in a little bit deeper from a different perspective. And of course, we're always going to talk about the actual market as relates to the Memphis metropolitan area. I work a lot with investors. I'm Terrence Hill, a real estate consultant. We've worked with clients around the world, multiple countries, as well as multiple states to purchase properties here in the Memphis metropolitan area, as well as liquidate properties as well. Buy, fix, and flip, hold, buy, fix, and flip. Also, those that are looking to hold on long term, and some people that are really just ready to kind of be able to park their money somewhere that they're going to know they're going to get some degree of cash flow, some degree of appreciation, and actually have a tangible asset. But all that being said, welcome, welcome, welcome. I greatly appreciate you all for stopping by and being a part of this process as we get started. So today, we're going to highlight three different aspects of the real estate market that has kind of been in the news and some things that's kind of behind the scenes. So starting with number one, we've seen recently where that a supposedly NAR report came out, said that 70% of licensed real estate professionals have not made a transaction, didn't make a transaction in 2025. Now, I spent an extensive amount of time on NAR and reached out to them, but hadn't heard anything back. I did not see that specific data, but say that's true. Say that's relatively close. Okay, I understand 2025 was not necessarily a good year for a lot of real estate professionals, but let's start from the top. In every market, specifically, even here in the Memphis metropolitan area, there are deals being done every single day. Let me say that again. Every day, in every market, real estate transactions are taking place. So let's start with that. Now, the the phrase, the headline of that particular topic, 70% of real estate professionals, licensed real estate professionals didn't do any transactions in 2025. That's something to be mindful of, because you do have to take into consideration, number one, you do have people that were working on real estate teams, and these teams may be doing tons of transactions, but the way that it's categorized, the agreement that the real estate agent and the team leader has is that all the transactions are the quote unquote team leaders basically projects. And so they're able to get 100% credit in the actual real estate agent. Other than the commission, they give no marketing credit, they give no data credit as well, as relates to being able to get those transactions done. So you can be on a team and effectively on your, one of these platforms show that you have 0 sales, but you may have 10 sales, you may have 20 sales. And so these things happen on a consistent basis. And of course, every team lead structure is different. So of course, that's something to kind of take and assess as well. So being able to understand that just because a person is licensed doesn't necessarily mean they're proactively out there trying to make deals work. In a lot of cases, I know quite a few real estate professionals that don't want to retire their license, but because they don't want to go through the hassle of kind of doing with the necessary paperwork in order to be able to bring them back to the market, but they would still just rather pay the fee to keep their license, the annual fees to keep their license, but don't do anything with them. So those are two key things that you need to factor in when you look at that particular number. On the other side of the equation, our real estate professionals, whether you actually completed a transaction or not, kudos to you. I understand that this particular industry, and as well as some others, but this one in particular, the real estate industry is front loaded, which means that the real estate professional has to spend an exhaustive amount of time, effort, phone calls, communication, showings, and the like, open houses, and there's no guarantee we're going to get compensated on the back end. So I completely understand where a person may need to go get a 40-hour-a-week job in order to be able to maintain and sustain their family and their lifestyle. But also, I truly understand deeply that this is, you eat what you kill. And in some cases, some of the stuff may seem to be dead, and the deal falls from up under you in a whole nother different way. So as a real estate professional, it's critical to understand that, you need to position yourself as an authority, building your brand, but also knowing that just because you're showing up every day doesn't necessarily translate over into an actual completed closing. I remember when I first started, I would show up to the office every single day, weekday specifically, and basically took me roughly about three and a half, rolled about 3.5 months before I got my first transaction. And this me showing up every single day. I'm doing it full time. I did have some ancillary income for some other things I had going on, but primarily I was trying to make this real estate thing work, and I just could not get any real traction. I came in with marketing experience and it just wasn't one of those situations where I was able to kind of build on it as fast as I would like. On the contrary, I worked with mid-tees in the past that came in, within the first 30 days, they got their first deal. Sometimes they come in with a deal already lined up in play that their first transaction is probably done within less than 30 days. And so there's a full scope and gamut and an assortment of ways of order to be able to go from where you are to where it is that you want to be, but also being able to kind of look at these headlines. 7% of real estate professionals didn't make any transactions in 2025. You want to be able to dive deeper into that information to truly understand how things work. Now, back to the current market. Now, 2025, I know wasn't the best year for a lot of people. I didn't necessarily hit the numbers the way that I wanted to hit them myself, but I do know a personal friend, a colleague of mine who's like a sister, and she crushed it. I think she had, me and I had a conversation, and she had one of the best years of her life. So I think as a real estate professional, a real estate investor, a real estate wholesaler, or anybody that's looking to get into business, don't necessarily get bogged down by the top end headlines. And that's one of the reasons that we started this particular platform, is because I wanted to be able to give a different angle, a different assessment, a different viewpoint, a different vantage point and perspective that as a real estate professional, there's more than one way to look at any degree of data. And so if you get started in 2026, I just did an open house this past Sunday, and we had more people come out to the open house on this past Sunday than I had probably in one single house, probably within the last 3 to 4 years, because it just hadn't been as consistent. So I believe, based on the buyer sentiment, and I really do like doing open houses specifically because I'm able to get insight directly from people that are proactively in the market, not some statistic, not some story that's on the news that's talking about doom and gloom or whatever the case may be, but real time data that you're able to assess, speak to your clients about, and of course, try the best you can to get the home sold. But very few homes that are actually listed in get sold during the actual open house. But of course, it does allows for a professional like myself to stay in tune with the current marketplace as it currently stands today. So it's critically important to be able to make that be able to make that work. And so yes, the market does ebb and flow. And of course, as one of my mentors have always told me, and it's kind of stuck with me long term, is that just because you start, the market is the market, which really means is that the way that you start your day, your philosophy, your mindset is going to dictate how you move and navigate through the course of the day. In addition to being able to understand that this is a real thing, that's something that's going to take shape for a lot of people, being able to stay in control of your thought process as much as possible in a positive way, because the market is going to do what it's going to do. You have to put blinders on, and of course, no one, don't bury your head in the sand for sure. But number two, being able to say, okay, listen, this is what the market is giving me. How do I pivot? How do I adjust? How do I do what's necessary in order to be able to scale and do the things I need to do in terms of being able to move things forward for me and my team, my family, and of course the quality of life that I want to live as a true professional. So I think being mindful of that is something that's critically important. So I think for the headline of, 7% of real estate professionals did not have any transaction in 2025, I can see how a large number of real estate professionals didn't have any transactions, but that doesn't mean that the real estate professionals did not put in any work. So I want to say to those professionals who did not have the year that they wanted to have in 2025, whether it be zero transactions or 100 transactions, whatever the case may be, kudos for you for putting in the work. And if you can, try to hold on as long as possible, because what has happened since, the COVID years, I would call them the early 2020s, is that so many people jumped into real estate because honestly, if you was breathing, you was able to get a household. I mean, if the house was standing, it was out of here. Within less than 30 days, you had multiple bidding wars, you had multiple offers. And so I see the allure of wanting to get started in real estate during those early 2020 years. And now, back then it was feast. Right now it can be potentially, famine. But the reality of it is that if you're able to calibrate your emotions and being able to calibrate your projection in terms of how you want to be able to move forward in the future, and being able to balance out your lifestyle, of course, the quality of life and what it is that you want to do on a broader scale. Yes, you may have to start this part time. I was speaking to a mentee last week, and he was asking me, Terrence, when do you think would be ideal for me to leave my job and jumping in real estate for flex. I'm like, listen, that's not for me to decide. That's going to be a determination that you're going to be able to come up with at your own time, at your own leisure, that affords you the opportunity to be able to, like, you know what, this opportunity is greater than what I'm getting compensated for. And I got enough, sustained financial footing in order to be able to make the necessary transition. Because what you don't want to do is that you want to stop everything that you're doing, jump into this field time, and it may take, like me, months, 2 months, 3 months before you get into real traction. And just the quality of life that you're currently living cannot be sustained if you don't have that consistent income. So to wrap this particular segment up, I think it's extremely critical for all real estate professionals to take a real look in the mirror and say, you know what other ancillary services can I offer? What else can I do in order to be able to facilitate things that I want to do in the future as relates to real estate? My degree of love for real estate still doesn't negate the fact I got, real bills, real obligations to myself and my family and the quality of life that I want to live in order to be able to make that work. So I think being mindful of that is critically important. So I don't really give a whole lot of energy to negative headlines, but I think it is something to be mindful of, but don't bury your head in the sand for sure. I think that's extremely important on all levels. Another recent top line thing that we've seen that we want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into as well is that the amount of buyers in 2025 that walked away from deals was extremely high compared to, I think it goes back, goes back a few years. There was even remotely close. I think on average about 16.9% across the country, and Atlanta being one of the areas where about 22% from all the major areas that was highlighted specifically in this Redfin insight analysis. It showed that basically, a lot of people in the Atlanta metro area basically walked away from deals. Now, walking away from deals happens all the time, and it will continue to happen because the way that you start is not necessarily the same way you feel by the time you get through the process. The more contingencies that you add to a transaction, the more it potentially slows down or put hurdles in the way of being able to get to the actual closing table. So, for example, it's three things that typically make a deal fall apart, of a transaction fall apart. So, essentially, as a buyer, you go out, take a look at some homes, you write a contract. In the contract, you're going to say if you're using financing, from a bank or a hard money lender or any degree of financing, you're going to actually have a financing contingency, because if you're relying on a third party in order to give you the money, if the money doesn't show up, then you can't buy the house. So there's a contingency that has to stay in place all the way through to the closing table. And that's one of the reasons that home sellers will prefer, in most cases, cash buyers over finance buyer, because the cash buyer is saying that I got the cash already. I don't need this particular contingency. Now, oftentimes, I would say 9 times out of 10, I've seen it very few times where you didn't have to have an appraisal. So if you're going to get financed, then the appraisal aspect is something else that you're going to need. There's going to be in place. It's going to be a requirement for you to put on the contract when you're trying to purchase a house. So now you got a financing contingency. Then because you're using financing, the lender is saying, listen, I'm going to loan you this money, but the value of this property, we need to get that assessed. And that value must come in at the amount that you're going to pay for the home or greater than that amount. Now, the way that, after the housing crisis, the way that the appraisals process started to work is different than it was prior to the housing crisis. And so those appraisers typically is going to come in conservative around that price point if they don't necessarily go under. So that's a topic for another day in terms of dealing with appraisals specifically and how their process actually works. But for the sake of being able to see what contingencies that can potentially cause a deal to fall apart, which is the topic that we're discussing now, it allows for you to be able to stand firm and say, you know what, we're making an offer of $200,000, for example, and we're going to use financing. Of course, we're going to put down earnest money. And if the financing falls apart, we can't purchase the home. And the lender is saying if the appraiser doesn't come in, I can't loan you the money. So those are two contingencies there. Now, I think one of the most critical contingencies, and I think probably based on my experience, the one that seems to make deals fall apart the most, is the inspection contingency. The inspection contingency has a wide reaching and wide range of ways to kind of look at a particular property. And what I mean by that, some homes have pools, some homes have sauna, some homes have different things, different features. And so when you're doing a home inspection, a licensed home inspector is going to come through as a general inspector. Their role is to highlight any potential issues as relates to the home that may cause concern for the actual home buyer. Now, this particular person may or may not specialize in any facet of the home: structural, roofing, HVAC systems, plumbing, electrical. They may not specialize in any one of those things, but they're going to come through. If the light switch doesn't come, if the light, you flip the light switch, the light doesn't come on, this is going to be noted. That needs to be looked at by a licensed typical licensed electrician. Now, it could be just a bug, but they're not there to determine what the issue is. They're there to determine there is an issue. Just to be clear, the appraisal's job is just to highlight any potential issues as relates to the home buying process. Now, once you get the home inspection back, for most people, because of course most people only buy homes, I think statistically right now, every 7 to 8 years compared to years ago, people was buying more frequently. So they don't really see a home inspection report. So once they see it, and it may be a lot of miscellaneous things on there, but it just so overwhelmed because number one, the way that the language is written by the home inspector, I think can be a concerning, but also too, just the sheer volume of things that the hot home inspection actually highlights can cause people to be like, dang, you know what? I'm spending all this money. My mortgage is going to be X, Y, and Z. I don't really know if I want to go into making this particular purchase. And so for example, if something comes up as it deals with electrical, then you got to go and bring in, potentially spend money, and oftentimes it's free to bring in an electrician, bring in a roofer, bring in, a structural engineer, bring in other specific key professionals in these arenas that cause concern based on the home inspection report. So the home inspection report item typically is the issue that caused a lot of home sales to be derailed. But also, you also oftentimes have where a buyer will wake up and just have buyer's remorse. It's like, you know what, like, I don't really know this is what I want to do, and of course, given that purchasing a home is one of the single biggest investment most people are going to ever make, being able to understand that purchasing a home and being able to commit to that financially is something that a lot of people kind of get scared at the last minute and begin, and want to walk away. Now, of course, most residual contracts have a clause in there that particularly says that the buyer is going to put up earnest money, and money kind of like a deposit. They're going to put up a deposit to pay down on the home. That money, if in fact the buyer walks away and it's not a lender issue, is not an issue dealing with the home inspection. You're out of the due diligence period in terms of the home inspection time period, and the buyer just wakes up one morning and chooses to walk away. Now, that particular buyer could in fact lose the earnest money, but that's not all they can possibly lose. Anytime this situation has happened to me or one of the people that I represent, and even my colleagues, and they ask for my opinion, I'm saying, listen, let that particular person who's going to walk away from a legal binding agreement speak to an actual licensed attorney, because you move into a whole nother realm of deep potential litigation, and the earnest money is the least thing that you can actually lose. Because if you put this in front of a jury, you put this in front of a judge, the judge may say, well, you know what, this particular seller made X, Y, and Z moves based on this binding agreement that you had with the seller in this buyer initially. Now, not only do you lose your earnest money, but this person here went out and they put earnest money down. They went out and spent money. They went out and did X, Y, and Z. So they need to be compensated for the efforts and things that they done. And so my role as a licensed real estate professional is to get every potential buyer or seller who choose or consider walking away from a deal in front of a licensed attorney, and let the attorney explain to them in detail exactly what it is they're up against as relates to being able to purchase a home and how that's going to flow if in fact they choose to walk away from the deal. And so I think that's something that's critically important and need to be fully understood. And so and of course, rates change. In some cases, you start down a road in terms of one degree of expectations in terms of what the mortgage is going to be, what the deposit needs to be, and the more and more time pass, the more detailed information you get back from the lender, because the lender is initially basing things on oftentimes of an assessment in terms of, like, once you produce the documents, we're able to get your numbers around X, Y, and Z, and also too, on a day-to-day basis, the actual interest rates fluctuate. And of course, we know interest rates now are far higher than they've been anytime anytime in the near future. I mean, in the near past. And so the it puts a buyer in a position where they're paying more money for a smaller house. I mean, this is just the reality of the situation. But the buyer does have a right to walk away, but they also have a responsibility to fully understand exactly what's necessary in order to be able to build on and kind of go from where they are to where they want to be. That's whether under contract and out of contract, and just thinking like, what, I'll lose that $2,000 is not a big deal. But I caution you to think that's the only potential repercussion that the seller has, because once you sign a legal binding agreement, the seller the seller does have a right to litigate, and those litigations be lengthy and also expensive, and potentially derail the buyer from buying anytime in the even in the distant future. And so that's something to be mindful of as a real estate professional as you speak to your clients, but also too for the general public, buyers specifically, and also sellers, that when you walk away from a deal, it's not just an emotional decision. It's not just cut and dry by saying like, what, I don't want to keep their earnest money on the selling side, and the buyer saying, what, I don't care about giving up the earnest money on the buy side. But you have far more to lose than just the earnest money. So I'm always wanting to immediately get their particular client in front of a licensed attorney in order to be able to explain to them the potential ramifications based on what it is they're looking to do and how they're looking to kind of maneuver and go forward from there. Yeah. So just being able to be mindful is critically important. I wasn't able to see any specific data as it relates to other than maybe, I don't know if the metropolitan area in Atlanta was the highest because they had the highest rate of potential offers and contracts at the particular at any given time period for 2025, because that could be one of the reasons why they have the higher failure rate as well. So if you have to look past the headlines and dive deeper and deeper into the situations to be able to understand and fully get a grasp of how things go in your particular area. The bottom line is that as a buyer, as a home seller, being able to be mindful of the unique position that you find yourself in as relates to putting in a contract, putting in an offer, and you shouldn't be rushed by a lender. You should not be rushed by your real estate professional, and neither you should be rushed by family members or just arbitrary clock that you put in your own head. Say, what, I need to do this by this particular time frame. I think every home buyer should go into the process of home buying as a marathon as opposed to a spread, because it's easy for us to look at HGTV, for example, and to be able to look at like, okay, cool, they want to look at three houses, everything is good to go. They're going to find themselves in a position where, basically, they want it done. They look at three, four houses, boom, they bought a house, and it showed the after effects that the home is occupied by the family. They turn in the house into a home, and all those things look great. But the reality of it is, on the ground, excuse me, is that it just doesn't happen that way. The reality is that oftentimes you have to look for an extended period of time. During the open house on this past Sunday, I was speaking. I'm always curious to know, are you just getting started, or have you started in the past? Or are you right back looking? I would say at least 50% of the people that come through most of my open houses is that they have either sold a home in the past, decided to read, waited on the fence to see exactly what the market was going to do. Because of course, I completely understand if I was proactively in the market to purchase a home to live in, I probably would move with some degree of trepidation, saying, what, man, dang, if I can wait it out a little bit longer, prices may go down. But the reality of it is that home prices are consistently going up. So much so the next segment that we're going to parlay into is that 16%, 16.9% of appreciation on average happened in the Memphis metropolitan area in 2025. Let me say that again. On average, across the country, looking at the NAR data, that home values went up about 6 to 7% across the board nationally. But specifically here in the Memphis metropolitan area, home values grew roughly about just under 17%, anywhere between 8 to 17%, given any prospective area in the metropolitan for 2025. So sitting around waiting on home prices to drop, I just don't see it being in the course. Yes, you could say that I'm biased because I'm in the real estate industry, but just statistically, we just take the last, this 2026, we just take the last 5 years and see what home prices went from 2020 to now. Of course, we know 2020 to 2023, typically the pandemic years, was a huge amount of appreciation. In some cases, 50, 60, 70% in a lot of areas across the country and a lot of areas here locally. I was speaking to a colleague a couple of weeks ago and she was talking about her client is selling a house. A client bought the house about 3.5 years ago. 3.5 years ago. And the home seller is selling the home and they're probably going to walk away with roughly about just under $100,000 in, profit from the home, and they only own the home roughly about 3.5 years. And so that was an anomaly based on the way that the cyclical cycle of sales and appreciation have happened over the last 30 years. But the reality of it is that we cannot discount that, extract that out of the actual data, because it's a part of how we get to the current sales prices that we are right now, home values that we have right now. Now, there'll also be news about a high percentage of homes are not selling at the list price. Of course, that's typically, I can see that being the case relatively easy because I work a lot with sellers, and home sellers always believe, myself included, that my home is worth more than what it actually is. And so going to the market at a higher price may not be the necessarily best marketing idea, but most home sellers feel as if, I can always adjust the price down. So looking at the data that shows that homes that sold wasn't necessarily selling at the highest price, wouldn't necessarily selling at the list price, doesn't really mean a whole lot, because the reality of it is that if we still got a just under 17% overall appreciation in the metropolitan area, then it's something to really be mindful and critical of, and just kind of taking a look and say, you know what, it really doesn't matter kind of where you listed at. What ultimately matters is where the home actually sells at. And if their sales price is above the average sale price, and of course you do get that degree of appreciation and a higher degree of value based on the appreciation. So staying on the sideline for an extended period of time, in my opinion, unless you have to, it doesn't really bode well for being able to get the best deal, being able to put yourself in the best position on the appreciation side, because home values are still going up, which means that you're going to eventually pay more for a smaller home. And of course, interest rates are going to do what they're going to do. Henceforth, the market is the market. So as a real estate professional, for those that are looking to get started with real estate, in real estate investing in real estate home buying, I don't think sitting on the sideline is the ideal strategy for most people. But again, I think at the end of the day, all home buyers, even home sellers and prospective investors, understanding what brought you into the industry in order to be able to make a purchase, make a sale, make an investment is something that's unique and special to you. And I think when it's your time to buy a home, that's when you should buy. Not when I say, oh, now's the best time. No, you should never wait. No, no. You wait as long as you want to wait. But also waiting, please understand that waiting is not a panacea. It's not a cure for being able to get the best deal. In most cases, statistically speaking. And again, all I'm doing is just highlighting the data from 2025 as relates to the Memphis metropolitan area, and on a broad range across the United States. Home values have also risen as well. And I speak to clients in other countries, and they're saying the same thing, that home values are pretty stable or even increasing in some of those areas. Now, I don't think across America we're going to see anything that we've seen like the early 2000s in terms of, high double digits, appreciation across the board within a small amount of time. This doesn't include those appreciation areas as relates to California, Miami, New York. Those areas are totally different. When I speak about specifically appreciation, I'm talking about, B tier areas like the Memphis metropolitan area, where, you have, the average selling price being about 270,000, 270,000, give or take, and be able to find yourself where you're going to be able to have that house appreciate for $500,000 within the next 5 years. That's typically not on the scale of what to expect. But again, nobody ever expected COVID to happen either, in the early 2020s and cause the built up demand and supply and the things that happened back then. But on the average, that's just not something that you're going to buy into this particular market and be able to see. So as we move into the last segment of this particular podcast for today, is that we want to talk about the market data specifically. So there are quite a few areas that outperform others in the Memphis metropolitan area. And given that you have I was speaking to the people at a couple at the open house this past Sunday, and we were talking specifically about how, Midtown compares to suburban living, in Cordova, where the homes that I was at, and they're relocating out of a different city. And I was just telling them, like basically, if you want ease of walkability, then you want to be in a more concentrated area in closer to the inner city. Then you want to do the Midtown this area. I love Cooper Young, I love Crosstown, and so there's a lot of areas in Midtown that'll afford you the opportunity to be in a high quality neighborhood and also be able to have the walkability that you want, but you don't necessarily get the same suburban type feel that you would get further out in the suburbs or the other municipalities in the broader metropolitan area. And so you want to be mindful of kind of what it is that you're looking for specifically. Are you raising a family? Are you empty nesters? Are you moving up? Are you moving down? Are you single? Are you married? So how frequently do you go out? Do you really like good quality? Do you want to be able to have, lower traffic? You want to be able to, have ease of flow in terms of the ins and outs of stores? Do you want to be, inundated with a lot of people being around all the time and a high level of traffic in, people as well as activities in automobiles? And so it's just a matter of a matter of personal preference, rather, where it is that you ultimately want to be. But I think being able to fully understand how the market is trending as it relates to home values. I also seen where, the also too, statistically, I've watched and tracked, activity in the Memphis metropolitan area for an extended period of time. In downtown and midtown, typically always have a degree of high volume of transaction because you do have so many more people. You got condos, of course, as well. So you have more people in a smaller area. So it does afford more activity, even on the sale and acquisition side, as it does on the rental side as well. So just kind of being mindful of that is something to be in tune with. And so you do have a lot of top tier areas that outperform some others. Last year, you didn't have as many new construction projects as the previous years, but new construction is always a thing. The challenge with new construction is that you either buy in an all new construction area and you don't really necessarily know what your what your neighbors are going to look like, what the neighborhood interior is going to look like over time. But you do oftentimes do have the luxury, from one perspective of HOA to kind of there to keep things corralled, to keep things within a certain standard as relates to most neighborhoods. And so just being able to be mindful of that is critically important as well. But as a buyer, getting to the marketplace with the average sale price, ranging anywhere from, 227,000 up to, in some areas, higher, closer to the $300,000 range, I think is being able to understand your budget and being able to understand what the market is offering as well. There are quite a few neighborhoods that have a lot of homes on the market for sale, and a lot of those homes are sitting. And then you have adjacent neighborhoods that may have very few homes for sale, and those homes are flying off the shelf. So being active in the market, as I am on a daily basis, I'm working with buyers right now where we're actively getting beat out in multiple office situations with competition. And I also have home sellers that I'm working with right now that we're trying to figure out how best to be able to get somebody through the door from a showing perspective because we have so much competition in that particular neighborhood. And so just as a home buyer or home seller, I think being able to be mindful and understand that your specific situation affords you the opportunity to position yourself in a way where it's going to be advantageous for you. So I think you always want to start with at least a consultation with a real estate professional. There's whether it be over the phone, Zoom, or in person. I prefer in person because the nuances that you can get from a free consultation in person affords you the opportunity to do things in a different way and kind of pick up on and being able to expound and extract out of the conversation that you can't necessarily get on Zillow. I mean, not on Zillow, but on Zoom as well as over the actual telephone. So I think as a professional, as a home buyer, I think even before you actually get out and take a look at homes, because I know everybody want to go see homes, I think you should have a home buyer consultation out of the gate just to get an idea in terms of like, what am I up against getting started in this current market? Not, hyperbole, not, examples, real time analysis of what's going on in the marketplace as relates to me today, looking to purchase in 2026. Of course, we heading into the spring season, so being able to be mindful of that and understand that the home buying season is always prevalent, whether it be winter, spring, summer, fall. but the spring and summer months is typically where you have the bulk of the activity at, because a lot of people, a lot of parents in particular, are looking forward down a pipe to where the home that they're looking to move in the school district for their children, they want to get a jump start on that. So I think being mindful of that as a home buyer, as a home seller as well, being able to get your home ready, start to get your home ready right now. If you're looking to get started in May or June or July of this year, the sooner you get started, the better off you are. And as a home seller, I think just a quick checklist that you want to be mindful of is like, how do my home, what kind of curb appeal does my home have? You know, is my home in the ideal condition that I want it in order to get it sold? Now, am I able to afford get my home all the way up to speed in order to get the amount out of it that I want from my actual sale? And so these are all things to keep in mind on the selling side, but also too on the buying side. When does my lease end? When I want to, when would be ideal for me to actually make that transition? Do I have enough money to save? How much money do I need to save? Am I able to actually get pre-approved? And so what we like to do is be able to have a free consultation, no cost, no obligation, in addition to being able to pair them up with a local lender that's able to give them some insights. And listen, if you're not ready to go today, here's the free things that you need to do in order to be able to make that purchase or the purchase price that you want to have. So I think being able to be mindful of that is critically important as well, because the more information you have before you get started, it's able to help you set realistic expectations. Because if you start out going out, taking a look at houses, fall in love with a house, can't necessarily get pre-approved for that price point of the house, now you want to throw the whole process away. Now, which may be the right thing to do for you. But the reality of it is that you throwing the process away is not going to change the fact that the home prices are going to continue to rise based on statistics, and also that the quality of home that you want to have may not necessarily be available down the road as opposed to some options that's available right now, and vice versa. I mean, it may be that you gave an exhaustive search and you decided to, you know what, I want to pull back, stay on the sideline for another year or two and just kind of watch things, but I can always get pre-approved. I know my financial situation is good to go. It's just a matter of being able to find the right home at the right time. So I think everybody, home buyers, home sellers, even investors, are in a unique position. And it's a tailored position that you're in. And so no one professional can say blanketly that, yes, you should do X, Y, and Z, or no, you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. The reality of it is that you should do what you want to do, the way that you want to do it, in a manner that's effective, efficient, and consistent for what it is you're looking to get accomplished for 2026. That's whether it be buying, selling, or investing. I think that's ideal for you to kind of get started on. And by the way, as we begin to wrap this particular first podcast episode up, I want to also highlight our next podcast. We're going to talk about the lawsuits that's going on, specifically with Zillow and Redfin. But also, I've been thinking about a question for quite some time, specifically about how is it that we got here dealing with being able to give free access from a realtor perspective to Zillow and all these other platforms via National Association of Realtors, and we don't necessarily get any compensation for them being able to promote and sell our listings for ads, for leads, and then we have to turn around and basically buy our own leads back from these platforms. So we're going to dive deeper into that as well, and a couple other topics that's going to be ideal. So thanks again for stopping by. Terrence Hill, the real estate consultant, No Comp, No Cap podcast. Thank you again.